This program is brought to you by Grand Valley State University.
We're telling a few stories. I just have one quick kind of how I viewed Gleaves in the office. He's the only human thesaurus I know. If I had a question about a word or how to use it or how to spell it or whatever, I didn't have to look it up. I just give him a call. And just one of the brightest guys I've ever had the opportunity to work with. What I'd like to do is just kind of go through, because I think especially in these times, in these economic times, in these political times, it's relevant to talk about leadership and why leadership matters. And what I'd like to do is kind of use the angler example, then some things that are going on today, and then kind of looking forward. And I think it's probably relevant because a lot of you will not remember how difficult the times were. Not all that different from what we're going through in Michigan today. But the late 80s, early 90s were very difficult economically. But first I'd like to say I'm really pleased to be here. I am so impressed with how Grand Valley continues to grow and expand and increase their presence around the state. A couple of years ago, I did teach a class up in the Cook DeVos Health Center. It was a PR and kind of philanthropic fundraising class. First time it had been taught. Why we were in a medical building, I don't know, but I guess it was available. But this campus just continues to impress the heck out of me. As we look back to the times in 90, Michigan had the highest unemployment rate in the country. Businesses were fleeing. People were moving out. Does it sound a little familiar to today? And that's when John Engler became governor, in the middle of this. And he really set out to change things. We had high taxes, high business costs. Government was expanding beyond control and beyond our ability as taxpayers to pay for it. We had one of the most generous welfare systems in the nation. Basically, you show up here and you don't get a job, we give you a check. It was pretty much that easy. Senior citizens were being forced out of their homes because of high taxes. This is something that you might not realize, but today we have a cap on assessment increases, and not that property values are going up today, but at the time, in especially a lot of lake properties where a lot of senior citizens had retired, their assessment increases were going up 15-20% a year. And they're on fixed income, so they were being forced out. This was a big problem. And then young people couldn't afford their first home because you couldn't budget for what your taxes would be 2 or 3 years down the road. It was one of the biggest issues that the state had to grapple with, and nobody had addressed it for about 30 years, and I'll get into what we did in a moment. So you might think, why would anybody want the job? And I know a lot of candidates are being asked today, why do you want this job? Engler had been a state representative. He had been a senator and led the rise to Republicans becoming the majority. And then he became majority leader. For 20 years, he had been kind of at the forefront of driving policy and issues and thought. And so this was the ultimate thing for him, to really be able to take over and drive the state in a direction that he thought would solve a lot of the problems that we were facing as a state. And I know Gleaves knows this because it's in the book, and we always talked about it a lot. On his first inauguration, before he went out, former Governor George Romney pulled him aside, and Engler just kind of asked for a piece of advice, and all George Romney said was, be bold. And we kind of used that as a mantra throughout the entire administration. We're not going to sit back and just tinker at the margins. We're going to be bold, and we're going to really get things done. And you have to remember, I come at this as Gleaves said, I'm 21, 22 years old at the time. I started working full-time in the state Senate my senior year as a way to pay for school so I could get through, and then went to the House. So I kind of worked on the legislative side and then came in here, and all of a sudden, after this long, arduous campaign, we have the mantle of power. Now it's incumbent on us to get things done. And that's really, as we look at what we're doing today and going forward, an election year coming up and everything, this is really why leadership matters, because you're given this prize. And it's an honor, and it's a tremendous amount of responsibility. So to get things done, you need to be a strong leader. We had at the time, the State House was controlled by the Democrats, so they were the stopper for a lot of the things that we wanted to do. So it took an incredible amount of negotiation and leadership to get things through. And with some pieces of legislation, the opposition was so strong that the Democrats basically dared us. They would pass some of the things that we wanted because they didn't think we had the guts to actually implement it. Little did they know, nothing stopped John Engler from getting something done. And so I want to show you a couple of articles of what we went through. And again, you know, a governor can come in and coast. You can be a caretaker. Or you can really come in and fix things. And I think this applies at the presidential level as well. You know, we had a very, very difficult, and Tom Bray, and some of you probably know Tom, he was the editorial page editor of the Detroit News at the time, and a national columnist. We had to do things to fundamentally change state government. And that meant doing things a lot differently than they had been done in the past. Well, once you stir up the special interests and you try to change the status quo, it gets ugly very, very fast. So I'm going to go through some of the editorials, some of the stories, and you know, as we go through, you know, this was dealing with we changed the state's welfare system. We had at the time for years provided a check to single able-bodied adults, mainly males. Well, on the campaign trail, we heard, you know, we'd go and visit with an auto worker, and he'd say, "My neighbor's staying home watching soaps all day, and you're using my tax dollars to send him a check." And at a time of constricted funding and reduced tax revenue, it was absolutely crucial that we take care of the vulnerable, and that's where we focused. Women with children, the disabled, and that's where we had to put all of our resources. Well, this was such a dramatic change that I'll call them the media elite, but the status quo, the powers of the state, you cannot believe the drumbeat of negativity and protest. We had people camped out on the Capitol lawn protesting our policies and our cuts. And judges let them stay there. So we had to walk by them every single day as they're screaming at us and protesting us every day. You know, and again, these were for single able-bodied males that we were reducing or eliminating funding. We just said, you have to get a job. And then for those left on welfare, we built in incentives. You have to go to a job training program. We'll provide daycare assistance and things like that. You have to work towards a job. We're going to try to break that cycle of poverty. We, ironically, we cut arts funding 50%. And this was the most awful thing in the world. Governor Granholm came in and cut it 100%, but she told people, philosophically, I support you, and I support a budget for you. But she provided no money. But the contrast was pretty stark. This was more than just a drip, drip, drip of negative publicity every day. It was a waterfall. And I was telling you at the table here, I would do about 70 to 80 calls a day. And every single local reporter had a story, a local human interest story, of how somebody was affected by a cut. So everybody was writing these stories all across the state. It was pretty difficult at the time to deal with. You can't imagine how burdensome this is, how depressing it was to deal with this day after day. This was a woman in Traverse City who said that because we told her she had to go to the pharmacy to pick up her prescriptions, we couldn't deliver them anymore. They said that we were responsible for her death. We were still covering her prescriptions, but she had to go get them. And they said we killed her. You know, again, these were unheard of at the time. And I think, you know, the public's been a little desensitized to this sort of thing. But this is what we were dealing with every single day. So much so that in October of 1991, he called us all in. And again, this is about as depressing a time as a staff can have. And there was a poll that had just come out and said, if the election were held today, would you vote for John Engler or not? Only 17% of the people. Now we're, you know, about 10 months into the administration. Only 17% said they'd vote to re-elect him. So we're kind of looking at it, we're out of a job, you know, it's going to be really ugly, we shouldn't even run again for re-election. But, you know, he looked us in the eye, he gathered us around in our, what was called our cabinet room, and he said, I don't care what the polls say. This state's in trouble. And he said, I'm going to make a lot of decisions, and we're going to do a lot of things. And if my decisions are right, everything will take care of itself, because good policy is good politics, and everything will be okay. He said, if it doesn't work, I'm going to be the best darn one-term governor the state's ever had, and we're going to leave the state in a better shape than when we took over. And it was at that point we just said, okay, we're going to all hang on to the coattails and go for the ride. That bucked us up in a way that you can't imagine, and that was just his way. He was not going to let the external forces get to him. He was plowing straight ahead, and he was going to fix things. And it wasn't time for weak stomachs at all. I mean, this was really brutal, difficult stuff. But if you got to know him, you knew he was a man who stood on his principles, very strong principles, and not a lot can sway him. But he's also open to debate and negotiation. If you believe differently than him, go challenge him. And he respected that. But you better come prepared, because he knows more than anybody else in the state will ever know, and that's what you had to face. I beat him in an argument one time in 11 years, and he finally backed down. And he was dealing with a press issue, and he agreed that I was right after the articles rolled out. But I argued with him for 2 days to finally get him to that position. So, again, he was a very strong, principled conservative. And I included a Russell Kirk quote because I understood that Annette Kirk was going to try to be here today with the snow and everything else. But I know she's coming back in the future. But this is one thing that I think kind of sums up. It's one thing that we always complained about in terms of Republicans versus Democrats and how the public viewed us. And this quote that I pulled is, any conservative is reluctant to condense profound and intricate intellectual systems to a few pretentious phrases. He prefers to leave that technique to the enthusiasm of radicals. And we always complained, as a Republican, you feel you have to explain every single detail of why you're doing what you're doing, when the other side can throw out one soundbite and slash you to pieces. But it's just kind of the way we went at it. And he was a believer in, let's give people all the information. What went into it, what are the potential consequences, what are the benefits, and let the public decide. And so that's the way we went at things. As you can see, election night in '92, we had shared power in the House, which had never happened in Michigan before. So the way this worked is Republicans controlled the House and had the Speaker for 1 month, and then the other month we went back the other way. Well, this just meant that when Republicans had control of the chamber, that's when we ran all the bills. The other time, nothing happened. And so, it was part of the strategy. We knew how to get things done. And then just 2 years later, you can look at the margin. You can look at, this was obviously a mandate. Things worked out. And it was exactly as he said. If we do the right thing, if we implement the right policies and we take care of people and fix the fundamentals in the state, everything will be fine. And, it's kind of, the national mood right now is not very good. But if you make the right decisions and the policies work, you can come back. The public catches on to this very quickly. This was a favorite of mine, saying we wouldn't feed the zoo animals. Well, nothing happened to the zoo animals. But, this was the sort of thing that just kept coming. So on to some of the things, the issues that we took on, and some of the accomplishments. Again, I said, when we first came into office, we had the highest unemployment rate in the country. By February of 1997, we were the lowest in the country at 3.2%. And again, this is a time when we're dealing with the competition from other states, but you look at relative to the rest of the country, we went about 5 years where our unemployment rate was below the national average. Michigan hadn't done that for a couple of months in about 30 years. It just didn't happen. So, some people try to say, well, a rising tide lifts all boats, and that's true. But the state policies, our boat was lifted a lot more because of the decisions that were made, because there was certainty in decision making, and people knew where government was going. Tax reform, school finance reform, that's what this refers to. On Christmas Eve of 1993, we eliminated school funding completely. Start over. Now, this came from the Democrats were trying to pull one over on us. We had been through 2 different school refinance plans. This had been something that had been dogging the state for 30 years, and nobody had been able to fix it. We ran 2 proposals up the flagpole, both failed at the ballot. We're coming back one more time. And Debbie Stabenow, who's Senator Stabenow now, offered a bill to completely eliminate school funding. Well, we knew something was up. This was political gamesmanship. And one thing that people we thought they had learned is do not play political poker with John Engler. He will beat you every single time. They offered this bill. We feigned, oh, no, you can't do this. They ran the bill. We put up the vote, closed the board. It was passed. And then we all looked around at each other. Now what do we do? And that was a very, but we had this opportunity to completely redo our school funding system. And again, I mentioned, most of the things were funded with local taxes. And school districts were starting to have millage increases go down in record numbers. If anybody remembers Kalkaska, they went bankrupt and closed their doors. This is what we were dealing with at the time. So we found a new system. It's Proposal A. You hear some questions about it today, and maybe it does need a little adjustment. We're many years later. But this was the biggest thing that had been done in the country at the time, and other states were calling like crazy, just asking what we did and how we did it, and it became a model for the country. Nobody predicted the economic times that we're in, but I would argue if we had a different kind of system, our school finance system, our K-12 system would be in worse shape than it is today. This has put some relative stability into the system. It's probably not perfect, but I haven't seen anything that might be better. When you look at tax reform and what we did, 32 real significant tax cuts. The property tax cut alone was $3 billion. That was real money that went back in people's pockets that they could invest and buy things and spur the economy. Urban core city issues. Just look around. Downtown Grand Rapids probably took advantage of our Renaissance zone more than any other city in the state. And the creativity here, it was like, why didn't we think of that? Renaissance zone said, well, you'll pay no tax. No state, local property, real estate, real property, anything for a set period of time. These were underperforming or non-performing properties in typically very depressed areas. They were old factories, they were contaminated properties, things that people couldn't develop. And we wanted to spur that, and we wanted to show tax cuts do matter, tax policy matters. We came to Grand Rapids and we had set a large geographic boundary and said, you put it where you want. They said, if you let us break it into 4 and we can have quadrants and put it in different areas that are not performing, we'll do great things. Look around Van Andel Arena right now. That's a Renaissance zone. Everything that's developed around it. Just over here, across the highway, that was a Renaissance zone. A lot of the buildings that have been fixed up and made into condos were part of Renaissance zones. And if you ever say, hey, buy a condo here and you won't pay any taxes or income tax or anything, that's because of a Renaissance zone. And it has spurred development, especially here, in a way that you're probably 10, 15 years ahead of where you would have been ordinarily. In the environment, air and water quality was the cleanest it had been in decades. Education funding up 70%, more than twice the rate of inflation, and student performance also went way up. We fostered school choice, brought charter schools into existence, and added accountability into public reporting so people could have access to information. So when you look at what the state's going through today, we have a lot of the same challenges. It's not that different. But our governor and our leaders in Lansing really aren't addressing the solutions. And I blame part of that on term limits. You don't have the relationships that once developed over 20 years, where you had a Republican and Democrat from the same county, and they would picnic together. They knew their kids' names, birthdays, favorite colors, even though they were different parties. And now people don't talk across the aisle, and it's really unfortunate. So that leadership quality, that leadership ability has been lacking, but I think people are starting to step up, recognize it, and have an ability to deal with it. I tell one story. You've read the budget problems that we've had in the state and the budget crisis and government closing down and things because people didn't get together and talk. Well, we had those problems too, but politically you knew that at the end of the day you had to get the job done. And one of my favorite stories, and he's corrected me on this because last year I told this story to a reporter and I had one little incorrect component. Lou Dodek was Speaker of the House. He ended up losing in that 94 race, but Lou was a really good guy. He was a farm boy, just like John Engler. We fought it out for 3 months, put on a good public show, called each other names, and at the end of the 3 months, okay, it's time. Deadline's coming, we have to get the budget done, the people deserve no less. John Engler marched alone into Lou Dodek's office. They closed the blinds. Lou pulled out a bottle of whiskey. I said whiskey. He corrected me later, it was a bottle of scotch. They took a shot, and 2 hours later the entire budget was done. It passed the next day. Now that was leadership, I think, on both sides, because they recognized both of them had to give a little bit, but they also stood for things. Now you get, well, we'll agree here, but then I'm going to pull the rug out here and I'm going to do something over here. It's just not the way government should work, and it's, I think, to the detriment of the people. So what you have in that inability to make decisions is the bureaucracy starts to do things on their own. And in a lot of departments, that's what we're dealing with today, is arbitrary decisions. There's no consistency. There's no consistent enforcement of the standards and the laws. And I think this can apply at the federal level as well. Uncertainty over health care, taxes. It's forcing businesses to hold off on a lot of decisions because you can't plan. Businesses make decisions 15, 20 years out. And without knowing what's going on today, how do you know how much you can invest and what's affordable? So that kind of paralysis, I think, is kind of tamping down any potential growth that we would have in our economy today. And leadership does matter. Because with leadership, you can set that certainty and you can provide that path for people to follow, knowing, no matter what you're going to do, if business knows what the equation is and what the metrics is that they have to make that decision, they can move forward with a yes or no. I was talking to a foundry owner from the Cadillac area the other day, and he was using utility issues as an example. Our utility costs, and this is one thing we tackled under Governor Engler, we said we have to be more competitive than our neighbors. We have to bring down our electricity costs. Well, they're back up. And at this foundry in Cadillac, his utility costs are $300,000 more than they would be in a neighboring state. And his investors are saying, we have identified a plant in Virginia. The state will give you the key and pay all your moving expenses. And your bottom line will be $300,000 less a month. That's significant. He said, I can hang on here. I can keep my investors in tow for maybe one more year. But if things don't change, we have to leave. And those 400 jobs will go with them. That's the reality of the policies and the lack of leadership, letting things get out of control. When we talk about state of the state, I have this headline up: Michigan cannot sit back. John Engler was not one to rest. This was his last state of the state, the last issue. I know Gleaves has his too. We talked about it. This is full of the final year agenda and what we were going to do as a state. And we were not going to sit back and just kind of let things happen. Engler talked about the future of cars, hydrogen fuel cells, and how we were setting things up for that. Well, now we have, hydrogen's developing, but we've kind of flipped to the new technology of batteries. But he set those things in motion. And this was a key quote from the speech: government cannot and should not mandate the solution. Government can and should guarantee an environment that fosters innovation, furthers investment, and fits consumers' needs. You basically build the platform and then let the entrepreneurial spirit take over and move in and get things done. And Michigan used to be that place. And I'd argue we can be that place again with the right kind of leadership. Another thing from the speech, he led the way in attracting the Rare Isotope Accelerator to Michigan State. Now they call it the FREB, Facility for Rare Isotope Beams. The name has changed several times. But this is $1 billion investment. This will attract scientists and researchers from all over the world. And the economic benefit to Michigan is unbelievable. But he started the whole process with Michigan State and Secretary of Energy Spence Abraham at the time. I would argue we've had 8 wasted years in Michigan, given what's gone on. And it's time to grab back what Michigan was. And I know we can do it. Business wants uncertainty, or they want certainty. The uncertainty hampers the ability to make decisions that come here, especially when some of our neighboring states are providing that certainty. We were talking about Mitch Daniels in Indiana. Phenomenal leader. Not the most effusive guy. He's not out giving a ton of speeches. He's just getting the job done. We had an opportunity in Michigan to get the Volkswagen plant. They wanted to come here. They had the property picked out. It was the perfect grade. Everything was perfect. They went to Tennessee because state government wouldn't work with them. It was going to be in the Battle Creek area. Power plant up in Bay City. And if you look at all the power plant proposals out there right now, this is how I think we get back to the leadership role in creating jobs. There are about a dozen proposals for power plants across the state right now. Bay City just got their approval to start the process, and they're still a long ways off. Each power plant, there's a clean coal, and for most of them, they'll take a dirty coal plant offline. And a lot of environmentalists say, well, it's still coal. Well, you're improving. We don't have the perfect solution out there right now, so shouldn't we try to get better? Each plant is about a $2 billion investment, 1,600 to 1,800 construction jobs, and about 400 to 600 permanent jobs. We don't have enough skilled trades in the state, if these power plants get moving, to build all those plants. We need to build a new rail tunnel from Detroit to Windsor because it can't handle a double-decker train coming through. You have to offload. How long do you think people are going to continue to spend the extra money to stop a train, offload, go to the other side, and reload? At some point, they're going to find another way around, and they won't be going through that tunnel. The Canadian Rail Workers' Pension will finance it. How many more millions of investment is that, and how many thousands of jobs? That's how you turn things around and get things going, but it takes a decision. You have to say yes. You have to say, if you comply with these laws, regulations, you get the green light. But it's all possible. I mean, I count, you can immediately create 20 to 25,000 jobs with a yes decision. Then hold their feet to the fire, hold them accountable, but get it going. And then what will happen is the banks start to say, what's going on in Michigan? There's something. I'm going to loosen up a little bit, because if they're coming back, I want to participate. And then the banks start coming in, and now entrepreneurs can get financing, and things start to happen. It's not rocket science, and it doesn't take a lot. It just takes leadership and making the right decisions. You know, one thing that we're dealing with today, Nestle Water, for example, the Ice Mountain plant, just northwest of here, they wanted to expand and create 200 new jobs. They had a well, the aquifer was all set. They don't draw out as much as a Coca-Cola bottling plant would draw out. But they wanted to expand 200 more jobs. They applied for a permit. The Department of Environmental Quality at the time said, no, you can't do that. We're not going to give you the permit. The city came to them and said, we're in the same aquifer. We've got a pipe. Why don't you just tap into that? So they did, created the 200 jobs. But they had to go around government, and the CEO of Nestle said, we're not doing anything more in Michigan. And the one thing about CEOs, they travel in the same circles. They talk to each other. They're in the same airports, you know, and what are you doing? What's going on? And if they say, don't go to Michigan, they're crazy, we don't even make it on the list. But at the same time, with the right decisions and helping a few of them move things through, we can get back on that list real quick. Just look what Mississippi has done since Governor Haley Barbour took over several years ago. And Mississippi was always the bottom of the barrel. We don't want to be like Mississippi. Well, the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, from 2004 to 2008, U.S. per capita income growth was 18.6%. Same time period, Michigan was 10.4%. Mississippi, on the other hand, was 20.8%, because they had a governor who got in and said, we're open for business. We're going to help foster growth here, and we're going to get things done. There are now more than 90 foreign companies that have offices or affiliates. They're opening auto plants and supply plants like crazy. When Hurricane Katrina hit, did you hear about problems in Mississippi? They pretty much handled it. They got the job done, and they rebuilt right away. And that's what leadership can provide. I heard the governor say, well, there was a comparison to Mississippi, and she said, we don't want to be Mississippi. And I'd argue we want to be just like them. We want to be back on a growth path. We want to catch them again and pass them. We have great assets in this state. I mean, this building, this university is one of them. Our engineering talent is second to none. I'm working on a wind energy component, a very heavy manufacturing project right now. And they say, we can't go anywhere else but the Midwest for this. The talent isn't there to do this. Well, Iowa has stepped up. They're doing great things. Pennsylvania has. Michigan can be there too. We can definitely do this. We have the talent, but these people are leaving to find work. We need to do something that's going to keep them here. Our natural resources are unsurpassed. Just look outside, all the snow. You know, nice to look at for a day or two. We have great universities. Our biotech economy is growing. We know how to make things here, and that's one of the biggest advantages. If you go down south, you can't find people with the work ethic that we have in Michigan. And these are all great assets to sell business leaders on. We've got a lot going for us. But it'll take leadership. It'll take decisive action. And watch the next budget debate unfold. It'll be introduced. The governor's introducing her budget next week. It's going to have a big tax hike in it, or an expansion of sales taxes to services. And there's going to be a big uproar about your local barber having to pay now taxes on what he or she does, and things like that. And again, remember, this is after the last budget hike, tax hike of $1.7 billion. Well, where'd that money go? With that tax hike, we drove more businesses out of the state. And now we have a $1.7, $1.8 billion deficit. So leadership, tax cuts, all of this does definitely matter. Just kind of going back, we were different. We got things done. We did not end. I mean, can anybody tell me one issue from the governor's State of the State last week? One agenda item.
Job creation.
But what's she going to do? I mean, everybody agrees we want job creation. But how do we get there?
Specific programs.
Well, the problem was there's not a package of legislation. There isn't a policy that we're going to follow. So, are we going to lose this year, or are we going to move forward? These were a couple that I just skipped through from the final State of the State. We had a lot of things going for us at the time. And I think this is what it all comes down to. We have an election year coming up in just a few months. And I would encourage everybody to pay attention. And whichever way you go, whatever your political philosophy, just remember that decision matters. So listen for the person who's going to provide the kind of leadership that we need in this state to turn things around. Because we have to attach our wagon to that person, because it is going to matter. And are we going to lose another decade? Or are we going to start on the path that we showed in '90, that you can bring Michigan back very quickly? We are perched to really take advantage of our assets and our natural resources and do something positive with it. And it's there, and especially if the national economy rebounds, we can help lead that recovery if we do things right. It's right there. So pay attention. Elections are very important. Politics affects everybody in their life every single day. And this one is probably one of the most important elections I can remember in my lifetime, and probably your lifetime as well. And just choose wisely, ask questions, don't believe everything you read or hear, ask for yourself and do the research for yourself, and get to that right solution for you and for the state of Michigan. Thank you. Questions? Yeah.
I have a question regarding the election coming up. Had a speaker in Grand Rapids here recently, I don't remember who it was, made the comment that on both the national and state level, irregardless of the party, I think one of the big problems is we don't have enough people passing laws, making decisions, who come from the business world, who understand how things work. As a result, they really don't understand the implications of the decisions that are being made. Would you comment on that?
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think the one thing that term limits may be helping is getting a few more business people to run, or people who have retired and are looking to serve now. But I would definitely agree that lack of experience, and one of the complaints that I have with the current administration of this governor is that there's virtually nobody around her who has worked in the private sector. She's got a lot of very good, very smart people, but nobody making economic decisions that have the business experience, that understand how these decisions affect them. And it's one thing for a lobbyist to come in and tell you what the impact may be, but they're a hired gun. If you haven't had that experience firsthand, it's pretty tough to understand. And I think that's part of the same problem in Washington today. And that's, look to who people surround themselves with, who our leaders surround themselves with. You want a diverse group of people with a diverse range of ideas, so you can debate it out. And you want somebody who's going to accept and actually foster that debate. But lack of experience, lack of business acumen is definitely a big problem. Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time to come speak.
My pleasure.
There's been a lot of debate around constitutional conventions. Do you think that that's a necessary step that we need to take? Or, it's a pretty risky...
I think it would be an absolute disaster for Michigan, and here's why. And I will, for full disclosure, I'm a consultant for Pete Hoekstra's gubernatorial campaign, but I heard him say this. It was last Friday at the Michigan Press Association here in town. And his reason for opposing it, and I agree with that. One, you go to a constitutional convention, the only people who are going to run to be delegates are people like me. We've been involved in politics, we know people, and we represent people with certain interests. And we're going to try to get that in the state constitution. That's not where it belongs. If you want to change a law or influence policy, that's one thing. The Constitution should be the basis for all these decisions and our kind of our guideposts. But as Pete describes it, if we authorize in this November, it'll be on the ballot, to have a new constitutional convention. Then you take a full year to elect the delegates. And then you take another year to actually meet and decide on what the changes are going to be. Michigan has lost 2 years. There is no rational, sane business person who's going to make a decision to come to Michigan while all this turmoil is going on. And don't think that these won't be the front page articles every day as people scream back and forth at each other. This is for all the marbles. I mean, this determines the future of the state. A lot of people want to put tax policy in the Constitution. It doesn't belong there. They want to put a lot of different issues that just don't belong there. That's what the laws are for, because times change. This is the foundation. And if we lose 2 years, and especially if the national economy rebounds, we will be completely left behind for an entire generation. And that would be devastating for the state. And all because of a political decision. So I feel kind of strongly about that.
It was talked about at a conference I was at last week, and
Yeah.
so there was a lot of wishy-washy different viewpoints of, we don't have the leaders that last time this happened, there were strong leaders that really directed it. And this time around, there aren't a lot of the strong leaders that you want.
Last time, if you look at a lot of the people that served in that Constitutional Convention, they either were or became statesmen and stateswomen. I mean, these were leaders in their own right, looking out for the best of the state. And they made some tough decisions. But now, the special interests control so much, and I don't care which side you're on, right, left, whatever, you can't let the special interests control what's going to go in your state constitution. That will have a negative impact for generations. Please.
JT, could you tell us a little bit, since this is a room full of people who are at the beginnings of their career, finishing some portion of college, what do you advise them to do to prepare to take their place, to become leaders? What's most important, you think?
First of all, I think you have to be driven. I mean, it has to be something in you to want to step up, because being a leader can be tough, and it can be lonely sometimes. But at the same time, it's exhilarating and it's rewarding. So if you're looking at doing this, sort of get involved, no matter what it is. Your local chamber of commerce, work a local campaign. Get out there and go door to door with a candidate and see how tough that job really is. Having the dog burst through the door and chase you down the street, having somebody slam the door in your face because you're campaigning for a politician, it's really tough stuff. But you develop a thick skin really quick, and you develop a camaraderie with the people that are out there doing it, and it becomes fun. And some of the people that you'll work a campaign with become your closest friends because you've been through certain political battles with them that only you understand. And so, that's a good basis, good foundation. Internships either on a campaign or in the legislature are a wonderful experience. And yeah, a lot of people talk negatively about politicians. But I tell you, the ability to serve, probably the most rewarding thing is the ability to impact people's lives. I mean, when I was in the governor's office and being from Lansing, I got a lot of calls from people who had nowhere else to turn. But they knew me, or they knew my brother or sister or my parents, whatever. And I could call directly to a department director and say, hey, this person's stuck in the bureaucracy, can you help them out? And whether it was an unemployment check or something through the Family Independence Agency, didn't matter. I was able to help that person just because I served for a temporary period of time in that office. And that, I think, is the most rewarding thing, when you can help somebody and they say thank you, and they had nowhere else to turn. And part of it is you have to be able to articulate what the needs are and what the demands are. But get involved. And I know a lot of you wouldn't be here if you're not already on that path and getting involved, and talk to many of you. And I just encourage you, just keep moving it forward. One thing is it provides you a great networking opportunity. You'll meet some wonderful people if you just kind of follow this path, people that will mentor you and introduce you to other people and other opportunities. And when those opportunities present themselves, don't be afraid, follow them. When I joined the Engler campaign, I had a very safe job in the House of Representatives, and everybody said, you're crazy. And I said, well, I'll have a great experience, I'll meet some great people, and if I'm out of a job, I'll go look for a job, I don't care. But taking that risk that everybody told me you're stupid to take, set me on a path that gave me opportunities and has been more rewarding than I ever could have dreamt. And so look for those opportunities. Look for a mentor who's going to reach down and help pull you along, and ask questions and enjoy it. Yeah.
Thank you for talking to us. You stressed, the importance of leadership in the upcoming election, and the state of Michigan right now is not doing too well.
Right.
Who do you think have some of those leadership skills that you're talking about, or who should we keep our eyes on?
Well, I just disclosed I'm working for Pete Hoekstra, so vote for Pete. No, as you go forward, on the Democrat side, for example, Andy Dillon, who's the Speaker of the House, is a very, very nice person. I like him personally. But look at, how he handles this budget situation. And I think both leaders, the majority leader and the Speaker, have had very difficult time with their respective caucuses, because legislators are very squirrely these days. And so you have to kind of weigh, okay, I have to keep my votes in line. At the same time, I want to make a decision. But I think we're at a time where the leader has to just get out front and say, this is where we're going, and get in line and follow, or just get out of the way. And so as we move forward, look at that sort of thing in that ability on both sides. I can say there are a lot of good people running right now on both sides of the aisle. There are some that are better than others, that I think have the ability to make the really difficult decisions. And there aren't many of those. So, do we want to be mediocre, or do we really want to take it to the next level? And I think that's where the decision comes down.
Was there one last question over here? I think there's somebody else who had a hand up. If not, okay. John, thank you very much.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Grand Valley State University. Visit us at gbsu.edu.